Welcome to Classic 4x4, the podcast for and by classic four-wheel drive enthusiasts, collectors, and restorers. I'm your host, Chris Piccone, and you can follow the podcast on Instagram at Classic 4x4 Podcast. And you can follow my trials, tribulations, and antics of collecting and restoring classic four-wheel drives also on Instagram at Overland by the Sea. Whether you're with like-minded four-wheel drive enthusiasts at a Rigs and Coffee or, interacting on in a Facebook group, there's always one common thread that people are talking about, and they're looking for advice and talking about really four core modifications in the four-wheel drive and 4x4 space, and that's lifts, lights, tires, and winches. So I thought that'd be fun to talk about on the Classic 4x4 podcast. So I set off and said, let me find somebody out there that not only has experience installing and repairing these specific modifications, can speak to the quality and longevity, has used these types of modifications themselves, has installed them on customer vehicles, and actually, brings them to the brink of disrepair at the best. But what I needed to find was somebody out there that could speak objectively and honestly. And that was actually the hard part. So I started to shake the bushes, talk to some of my confidants out there. And there was a couple names that got thrown out there, but the one name and the one shop that got mentioned the most was Mount Zion Offroad. So my confidant that I was speaking with introduced me to the gentleman that owns Mount Zion Offroad. We had a great conversation, and next thing, one thing led to the other. We're here today. So for Mount Zion Offroad, our friends at Mount Zion Offroad, we have Mike Cashman, who's the owner, and Travis Leburn, who is the lead technician. What's up, guys?
Hey, man. Hey, thanks for having us on. It's been something we've been really looking forward to.
Dude, I'm excited to talk today about, lifts, lights, tires, and winches. What's interesting is not only are you guys have these things on your own personal rigs and out testing them and regularly bringing to the brink of the end, but you're also installing them for your customers too, and they're out actually wheeling them. These aren't like the work that you're doing isn't just for a bunch of pavement princesses. These things are actually getting wheeled. So
yeah. One thing that we're really proud about, and we started this at the core, is doing monthly four-wheel drive trips. We host trips at Roush Creek Off-Road Park and AOAA, and we get anywhere from 6 to 20 different rigs that all come out on a Sunday morning, pack a lunch, and we go do some tough trails. We typically will tackle trails that everybody can do who shows up, and we have a really good time, mixing the whole social, like cars and coffee part of this with actual real live four-wheel drive use is what it's all about.
That's super cool. And there's a lot of value in what you can talk about today from that experience. So, and for all of you that aren't familiar with Mount Zion Offroad, you got to check them out on all the social channels on Instagram. Their handle is Mount Zion Offroad. Mount is spelled out Mount. Also, check them out online. Their website is also MountZionOffroad.com. If you're in, the York, Pennsylvania, Harrisburg area, even Baltimore, Maryland, check them out. They're right outside of York, Pennsylvania, in Dover, Pennsylvania. And their shop specializes in repairing, maintaining, building, and restoring four-wheel drives, both classic and late models. So,
absolutely.
Again, thanks a lot for joining us today. Mike, man, tell us, you founded Mount Zion Offroad, I think in 2006, right?
Yeah, it was kind of between 2004 and 2006. I had grown up in a family of Jeep lovers. My father had fixed some up, some crashed insurance jobs. And so I just grew up with this mentality that if you don't drive a Jeep, that there's nothing else, right? And so going through high school as a senior, I fixed up and flipped maybe 2 or 3 different Wranglers and Cherokees and that kind of stuff. And as I was struggling through college to kind of find direction, I started there in engineering and kind of floundered a little bit and had always been in a family of entrepreneurs. And so I switched into business management, did really well there. And about that time, we met a guy at our church that had a small little shop, and we leased a couple bays. And that was at the core of it, the start of Mount Zion Offroad. I remember the conversation. What do we call it? And I was like, man, I definitely want this to be off-road related. And so we kind of started with a small 3-bay shop and worked on that for a really long time. But that's the kind of Reader's Digest version of how Mount Zion got started. Of course, we've got a little write-up on our website of a little more in detail on that. But, I've been kind of a diehard Jeep guy from the beginning, and getting to do what I do every single day is what it's all about.
And you've come a long way from those 3 leased bays. Your facility is massive now. I think it's 10 bays. How many square feet?
We've got 10,000 square feet under roof. We've got a total of 11 on our staff. So we've grown a lot since the early days in 2004, 2005, 2006, for sure.
That's cool. And that brings us to the man, the myth, and the legend, the guy that actually runs the shop, Travis. What's up, Travis? How you doing, man?
Good. How are you?
Good. So how did you end up with Mike and the rest of the Mount Zion team?
I worked out a just regular repair shop for probably almost 10 years. And I always had the passion of 4-wheel drive vehicles and Jeeps and working on trucks. And I just was wanting something more in that field rather than just doing general service work on minivans and whatever else. Yeah. So I had actually stumbled across the Facebook ad that Mike had out. I stopped by and we talked about wheeling and trips to Moab and stuff. And
so
before you know it, here it was.
Hey, man, it's a lot better than doing oil changes, lube oil filters on some minivans, right? You're working on some cool stuff. But, you're the one that's installing these things and, a lot of these modifications. And you're seeing your customers bring these things back into the shop too, beaten, battered, and broken. And there's a lot of value in that. And there's a lot of value that I want to, in our conversation today and getting that across to our listeners. So question that I ask every one of our guests, and I'll start with you, Mike. What was your first car? Some tells me it was a Jeep.
Of course, yeah. It was a 91 XJ 2-door. Had a 4-inch lift on it, some super swampers, a Tompkin rear bumper, which I thought was the coolest thing. And then I put the spare on the roof. I thought it was awesome. It was kind of a foray from what the rest of my family had done because they'd always kept stuff stock. And for me, at 16 years old, getting this Jeep Cherokee that had a 4-inch lift on it, man, I instantly signed up for a local Jeep club. It was all about going 4-wheeling. So that was kind of my first 4-wheel drive.
And I also, in our pre-interview today, I found something out that was interesting because every single shop owner I know, like off-road or 4x4 shop owner I know, they all drive JL 392s,
Sure.
And you do not actually, which is rare, but you drive as your daily. Tell our listeners what your daily is because it's kind of a variation.
Yeah, it's a variation. It's what existed before the 392 JL. I had an LJ for a long, long time, like almost 10 years. And I said to myself, I'm never going to buy a JK until I do it with a V8 because I just felt at that point like the 3.8 was so slow and they're just underpowered. And once you put 37s on them, they're even worse. And so I found a deal on the right 5.7 JK. And so I drive a 5.7 Hemi swapped JK. And then we did like custom axles and suspension and everything in it. So it's got 37s, a 44 and a 60, and a 5.7. Works really well.
So when are you trading it in for a 392?
Oh, jeez. I don't know. Right now, like I've been really thinking a lot about, I have a Wagoneer that I've been working on a lot. So I really have been just dedicating kind of my brain space to that Wagoneer. So I don't know. I've got 3 girls under 7. So I hate to have anything too nice because I just feel like they totally destroy the interior of whatever you're driving. Maybe when they're like 18, I'm kind of 392.
That's funny, man. Everybody always asks me, they're like, "Oh, you must drive a Jeep as your daily driver." I'm like, "No, I drive Toyotas. I'm on my 4th TRD Pro right now, man."
Yeah. My wife drives a Sequoia, so I'm right there with you.
Hey, if it's old, trust me, it's always Jeeps, Rovers, Toyotas, but if it's new, that's all I'll drive, man. And 4Runners. I'm on my 4th one right now, and I mean, you can't beat those things, man.
I know, for reliability, it's really tough to beat them. They're different though. You can't compare a 4Runner to a Jeep. They're just different classes.
You're right. They don't break down. You can't compare.
Yeah, true that. True that.
Now that we've had enough laughs, but Travis, you gotta answer the same question. What was your first car?
My first car was also an XJ. It was a 1985 XJ that was it was a factory carbureted 4-cylinder with like no options other than a sunroof. And I actually still have the Jeep. It's in my garage at home.
2-door or 4-door?
It's much different than it was when I bought it.
2-door or 4-door?
It is a 4-door.
Gotcha. That's pretty cool, man. That's awesome.
I used to wheel it in Moab.
Yeah, I've had Moab twice. Been up to different off-road parks with it.
It's got a V8 in it now.
Yeah, it's basically just the original shell at this point.
Yeah.
Everything else.
One time.
It's a body.
Yeah.
That's super cool, man. And I was doing a little research for our show today, and I looked at your daily driver, which is a mid-90s Chevy square headlight. What year is that?
95.
95, I figure it was mid-90s Chevy square headlight with pickup with a Alumabed on it, which like our my friend Josh Human at Working Class Trucks would be absolutely jealous of this thing. It is awesome. And please tell me it's got a diesel in it.
It does not. That was actually a factory 4.3 truck. So it was V6 originally, and now it has 5.7 V8 in it.
That's cool. That's all. I figured there's no way that you were gonna have a 4.3 6-cylinder.
Yeah, no, I tried it for a while.
He also saw an axle swapped in truck. So it originally came with IFS, and he put what axles in the front?
High pinion 44, actually out of a Ford.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. That's super cool. So let's get into the nuts and bolts. Let's talk about lifts, lights, tires, and winches. We'll go in actually a little bit different order than what I said. There some of these particular modification categories I have very little experience and very minimal opinion on. And some of those categories I have an immense amount of experience and a lot of opinions on. So we'll go through each of these categories from least to most. And then I'll kind of tee you guys up on here's what my thoughts are. Here's my experiences. You might agree with me. You might not agree with me. And guess what? What I think doesn't matter because you guys have more experience in this area than I will ever have.
Sure.
So let's start off with winches. Like I'll be honest, I have had one rig, one build in my collection that had a winch on it. It came with a winch. We know Warren is the biggest player in the space. Super Winch is another big player. And, sometimes on the road and sometimes at some of the rigs and coffee, you get that guy that has the Harbor Freight special Badlands and he completely lives and dies by it. But
sure.
You guys, for that one rig I had that in my collection that did have a Warren winch on it, I never actually even despooled it. The controller stayed in the center console the entire time I owned it. So I never actually used it, but you guys are putting these on, the rigs you're building for your customers. You guys are using them off-road. Your customers are using them off-road. Just, if I'm a customer and I'm coming to you and saying, hey, cost is nothing. I want the absolute best out there. What are you telling me?
Generally, and Travis could put some input in this. Generally, our go-to is Warren.
Right.
It's a tough brand to not sell, and so everybody recognizes that big red W. And so when you sell a Warren winch, it's a pretty easy sale. Now, they've got a lot of different steps in their tier of offerings. So the very very top, you've got like your Xeon 10S Platinum, which has a lot of features. I would say we don't sell as many of those as we do their VR 10S, which is still a good looking winch, kind of a hybrid removable solenoid pack. You can get it with synthetic line. And, for like a winch that's in the $800 ballpark, it's not a bad option. It's a great option, frankly. It's what I run in my JK and use it regularly.
And Travis, are you seeing these things when you're installing? Are they coming back into the shop beaten, broken, or are they holding the test of time?
I mean, I can't say that in the time I've been here, I've had one come back broken or with a problem even. I've seen them come back heavily used, but usually still doing the job.
I think what kills them the quickest is corrosion.
Yeah.
And you can't necessarily blame it on the winch necessarily. Like, obviously, you're in the Northeast and you see this stuff. Man, I don't know that there's a TJ that comes in the doors here anymore that doesn't have a frame that's rotted out. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible. So, like, the winch that's in my head right now that I can think of that's not working was completely, like, it must have been parked in the ocean. You know, I was just like, oh my gosh, like, it's incredible. No wonder it doesn't work, you know?
Gotcha. Hey, so the grandfather of the industry holds true, tried and true. You know, have you ever installed anything else other than the Warrens, or is it just?
Yeah, sure.
Gotcha.
We had a Badlands in 3 weeks ago. A guy bought and wanted us to install.
We've done some of the Quadratech's house brand winches.
Yeah, the Badlands one, in just our experience that we just did, was huge.
Yeah.
The case size was huge, and so it made it difficult. We were putting it on a Mojave.
Yes. Yep.
And the bumper that the guy selected, it made it very difficult to fit it because the case was bigger maybe than it needed to be.
Otherwise, it was surprisingly, like, good looking.
Yeah.
Good quality. It looked nice on it.
Yeah.
Hey, you want to know something? Some of us get jealous and excited at Harbor Freight sometimes. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, but
when it comes to classics, though, like, it's hard not to think about the 8274 Warren winch. And it's just like the iconic winch that, like, everybody's grandfather had on their, work truck from the 60s, and so it's just.
When I think of like a CJ or an FJ build, like you picture that 8274, like that tall 8274 on the front of that exposed frame every time, right? But I know you can get rebuild kits for them, but they're not. When you do find them, they're tough and they always have to be rebuilt. So they're expensive before they're even rebuilt. Have you guys rebuilt any 8274s?
We rebuild any in-house?
No.
I don't think so.
So you'll pick them up already rebuilt and...
Sure. I kind of thought you could still buy them new or a version of that winch new.
Mm-hmm. No, you definitely can. But you see some people want to keep it real and keep it classic and they'll rebuild them, man. That's pretty cool. So it sounds like the grandfather of the winch space, Warren, wins in this arena, purely because they have so many different levels. Is there one go-to that you always are like, hey, this is the model that, we sell the most of, we love installing, and it is like our bread and butter?
Yeah, I think probably the two there are either the VR10S.
Yeah, VR is popular.
The VR10S, which is their entry-level winch, I guess you would call it. And then the next step up would be their Xeon winch. So probably between one of those two are, I would say, the go-tos. And if you want extreme top shelf, the Xeon Platinum is kind of the nicest.
The overkill. We'll call it the overkill.
Yeah,
That's cool. So somebody once said to me, and I've never had this verified, that like the equation for a winch is you just double the curb weight of the rig, right? So say, for example, your rig is 4,000 pounds. You just double the curb weight and you need an 8,000 pound winch. If your curb weight is 5,000, double it, you need a 10,000 pound winch. Is that true? Is that how you guys do the equation?
Yeah, I thought it was 1.5 times, but 2 is probably great. Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. So there's some validity to that. Sometimes you're talking to people and they throw stuff out there and you're like, that sounds about right, but I've never actually heard anybody apply that. So that's like 1.5 to 2. Gotcha.
But when you look at like the Warren VR line, they make an 8, a 10, and a 12. Mm-hmm. And it's all the same winch. I think they just maybe changed the gearing in it.
Right.
And so the capacity changes a little bit. But, when thinking about a winch, it's important to think about all the recovery stuff that goes with it. And so, having a winch is one thing, but if you don't have like soft shackles, hard shackles, maybe a snatch block, a tree saver, and a good pair of gloves, you might as well not have the winch either, because like that stuff is as important as having a winch on the front, unless your winch is strictly just the hood ornament that you want it to be.
Which for a lot of people it is, man.
It is.
Like you said, it just, you don't use it a lot, but it just corrodes. Yep. So that's fun. That's where I thought the conversation was going to go, but hey, I'm glad there's some validity to that is a great product that's out there.
One thing that's cool about Warren too is they just recently acquired a small niche company called Factor 55.
Mm-hmm.
And Factor 55 specializes in all of that nitty-gritty recovery stuff. It seems like every single winch that we install, we put one of their thimbles on it or a flat link, and it just kind of caps off the end of that winch line really nicely. So that's kind of our go-to thing every time we install a winch.
That's pretty cool. As far as I've gone with the Warren brand, is actually just replacement locking hubs. And the couple times I've had to replace my hubs, I got to tell you, they've been phenomenal, and they're high quality, man. So especially in comparison to what came from the factory and some of these older CJs on the front axles. So. All right, let's move on to the next topic, which is lights. So this is an area where I personally do have some experience and an opinion. Anybody that's ever seen any of the trucks in my collection, you'll notice that every single truck has a set of Hella 500s on it, the nice round 5-inch round. And now they have the value fit LED line for the Hella 500s, which, I mean, bang for your buck, are just absolutely awesome. I live and die by them. They're great. I use them off-road. Personally, almost all the off-roading I do is actually on the beach. All of our listeners know I live in a coastal community, and we have several, not only the state, but also several municipalities up and down the coast that issue actually fishing permits and allow us to drive on the beach. And for anybody that's ever driven on the beach, and a lot of times you're actually fishing at night. You're very rarely actually fishing during the day. So you're driving on the beach off-road at night. And if it's a clear day, full moon, a clear night, full moon, anybody will tell you, you actually don't even need headlights on the beach, because it's like daytime. But if it is a foggy or an overcast night and anything less than a quarter moon, it is pitch black out there. Yeah. And I got to tell you, those driving lights are, I mean, absolutely saviors. The other thing I do on all my projects is swap the factory headlights. But I mean, the core of my collection is always Jeeps, and you got the 7-inch rounds, and on the FSJs, the 5x7, rectangles, and that's they weren't known.
That covers most of it.
So they weren't exactly known for the greatest factory headlights or halogen or incandescent or whatever headlights. So I swap them out to LEDs. I've used truck lights before, but my last couple projects and had a mediocre experience with truck lights, which quality wise, those things are amazing. You take those things out of the box and you're like, wow, I am using a good quality product.
It's got a big heat sink on the back of the light. You're just wow.
You take those things out of the box, man, and you when you have them in your hand, you're like, there is no expense spared on these things. You're holding, they're heavy. They install great. They plug and play with the H4 adapter. I mean, it's perfect. But I got to tell you, the past couple times I've bought the $75 Amazon specials, and they perform very well at a price point where I could buy literally 4 sets of those for what one set of truck light costs. So, and I haven't had a bad experience with any of them. And I'm like, so, I mean, I hate to admit it, but I'm a fan
of issues with some of the Chinese imported LED headlights, especially the ones that seem to come with all that glowing halos and all this kind of trinkety stuff where you're wiring in turn signals. And I feel like we've had maybe 2 or 3 sets out of the box where it's just oh my gosh, you spend hours troubleshooting why these things don't work. And, so I think if you can keep it simple with just a straight up LED headlight, great. Probably the imported ones are probably a good option. But if you want to get all the fancy LED stuff in there, maybe stick with something that's a little bit, a little bit higher quality if you can.
And I do keep it simple. No daytime running lights, no halo rings, no turn signal rings or anything like that.
As a classic collector, like I can't imagine a lot of people are doing that. But in the JL world, it seems like everybody is trying to like rave out their Jeep and they're putting glowing everything on it. Right. Like all the kids in high school. I feel like all the kids in high school that used to modify their Hondas all grew up and bought Jeeps
with green turn signal headlights. That's too fun.
Right.
So let's start out with headlights. Like, what is your go-to when you guys customer comes in and you're like, you know what, I need a brighter, better headlight. Though the factory is now, a lot of the factory brands are putting LEDs in right now. But say that guy comes in with the JK and he wants a 7-inch round. What are you guys going? Like, what avenue are you guys going down?
I think we all run truck lights.
Yeah. I have truck lights in almost every one of my vehicles, with the exception of the last one. I actually put Rough Country had an LED headlight, so I tried that out. And I actually really like those ones still.
And they look good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. So truck light is the go-to replacement there. That's awesome. And then what about auxiliary lighting? LED, both driving, fog, if you're doing reverse auxiliary, where are you guys going there?
So I think it really depends on aesthetics, like what the actual light looks like, because a lot of people want a different appearance.
Right.
Like some people want the big 9-inch Overland expeditionary lights, like ARB cells, right? Mm-hmm. Some people like the real vintage KC covers with the smiley face man on them, or their light bar where you link them all together. Some guys want some guys really like the look of Baja Designs, like desert race kind of a appearance. So, there's that part of it. I think as far as brands that we do regularly, of course, it's going to be Rigid, Baja Designs, KC, probably a little bit of ARB. There's some up-and-coming brands that we see making some unique solutions like Diode Dynamics, making some very OEM-specific LED fitment light bars. So I would say that's probably our most up-and-coming brand. But I would say that's probably a pretty good mix. Yeah. I think what's your favorite? I think my gut is Baja Designs.
Mine, I'm like diehard Baja Designs on stuff. I like the look of the light, and like the output of them is like phenomenal. But I know on my truck, I wanted something classic. I wanted just that round light. So I did those hella value fits. It's just like a big 5 or 6 inch round light. And it just looks right.
It's iconic. I mean, it just looks right. Yeah.
It's iconic, and they come in a pair, wiring harness, relays. Like, it's in the box for like under $300. Right. I mean, it doesn't get better than that, man. I guess it's true. I never really thought about it. Like you guys brought up a good point. It depends on what you aesthetically want, and I always go towards the Hellas because it's got that classic look and that. But if you're looking for the square or the full bar or the big, Safari overlanding 7 or 9 inch, that's interesting.
I think for functionality, though, a feature that I really like about Baja Designs is that it's so easy to interchange optics. Mm-hmm. So, like, let's say you buy a light and you don't want it to be a floodlight anymore. You want to make it a spot. Well, you just got to buy lenses and O-rings and you swap them out. Let's say you don't want them to be white anymore. You buy your amber lenses, driving combo lenses, and an O-ring, and you swap them out. And so it makes it really cool if you end up wanting to switch that light to a different position, or you are swapping them to a different rig, or maybe you want something amber. It gives you a lot of flexibility
without having to buy a whole nother light.
Yeah, that's kind of my favorite feature from Baja Designs.
Now, is there any other I've never heard of that before. And is there any other manufacturer that's doing that?
I don't think so.
Not that I know of.
That's pretty cool.
Four little Allen screws. You take them out, you take the lens off, and replace it. And the lenses aren't that expensive. I think Baja Designs definitely markets themselves as a premium brand in the industry, and I think they deserve it for sure. I mean, when you hold their lights, it's just like that conversation we had about truck lights. I mean, big aluminum machine pieces, and you're like, oh yeah, this is worth it. You know, I just spent $220 for their like entry series Squadron Sports, but they're nice. You know, we do some weird rigid stuff too. Recently, we've had the like, I guess it would be the Game Warden.
Oh yeah,
doing ultraviolet lights, which is kind of unique. So you can.
What's the use case for that?
So at driving at night with no lights on.
Mm-hmm.
So they've got full like night vision, and so these IR lights, infrared, are like driving with fog lights on when you have your like either infrared or night vision on, which is kind of unique.
That is pretty cool. So, and you did this for like a Pennsylvania game warden?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's
cool.
First off, it's cool that you're upfitting, you know, game warden rings, which is neat in the first place. Right? Talk about a unique use case. But so what do they emit? Do they emit like just kind of like a very dull red light out of them?
I think so. You can't really see it.
Yeah, it's hard to see it without having goggles or anything on.
Yeah. So that's the only company I knew that made those.
Yeah.
I think Rigid made some laser. Was it Rigid?
Baja Designs.
Baja Designs.
Yeah.
They do an actual laser. So it's not LED. It's not incandescent. It's not halogen. It's an actual freaking laser, man.
Laser beams. So what I'm taking away from this conversation is that you need to buy Travis some infrared goggles for the shop so he can test these lights out. You like that, don't you? That's a good plan, right?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
You know, one thing we
Goggles.
always do are these standalone like electric circuit controllers. Like I think that's part of the conversation when we're talking about lighting, especially if you've got like 3 or 4 different circuits you're adding. We always go with either Switch Pros or S-Pod to actually have a standalone lighting controller. So it makes wiring these things a breeze because you don't have a separate relay. You don't have a separate fuse. You don't have a separate switch. That's all integrated into the controller. And you just wire the light right to that controller. And the controller takes care of switching, relaying, fusing, the whole deal. So we do that on anything that we're doing, like generally more than 2 or 3 circuits. Because like these newer vehicles, you can't just tap into something. You know, they've got all these multiple CAN bus systems, and you start pulling some power out of a different circuit, and you're getting check engine lights and error messages, and things don't work right. So, like, that's one thing to probably just talk about briefly in that lighting thing is that the importance of a dedicated lighting controller.
Which I never really thought about till you brought it up, and that's a good point. And
it's great. It makes it so organized and neat and tidy, and it's just the way to do it.
It's just clean. Wow, that's a great point. So, Baja Designs is the takeaway from lighting.
I think so.
Yeah, it's definitely the takeaway player from lighting. And the switching units. What was the brand for the switching units?
The 2 biggies are Switch Pros and S-Pod.
Gotcha. Which do you guys prefer?
Ooh, they're a little different. Yeah.
I think I like the S-Pod control module a little bit.
Yeah.
Like the underhood part where the wires actually get attached to.
But some of the Switch Pro stuff, they have like very unique vehicle fitment stuff. So they'll have like a CNC printed plastic bezel that snaps into a console of like a new Tundra. And so it's just like, oh my gosh.
No brainer.
Yeah.
It's clean.
It's clean. It looks factory. Like they made some unique like F-150 solutions where there's, you know, they literally remake a plastic dash piece and put the receiver for their switch bank right in it. And it's just like, oh my gosh, that's cool.
I love when stuff is the R&D behind a lot of this stuff and how it integrates with the OEM and the manufacturer designs. You got to love that, man.
Yeah.
That's super cool. That's a good point. So here's one that everybody has an opinion on. We'll move on, which is tires, man. I gotta tell you, I used to have a very strong opinion about BFGs. Like if you walked into my warehouse where my collection is, every single 4x4, classic 4x4 I had in my collection. The first thing I do is I don't care what rubber it has on it. Whether I'm replacing the wheels or not, strip them off, throw BFG, TA, KO2s on it, man. I did that for every single one. I've had them forever. And that's just that they ride beautifully, on road, off road. Like they're just awesome. And then COVID hit. And when COVID hit, I couldn't find them anywhere. I had a couple projects that I was doing and you could find like, oh, one distributor had like one and it was $350. And then another distributor had two and he would take $300 each. And then you were like, but now I only have 3 tires. So I got to find somebody. Like you couldn't find full sets out there. And one day I just like, I was on the phone with, my tire source and he was like, have you ever thought about the Toyos, the open country, the AT3s? And I was like, not really. He's like, they're a good price point and they're a good tire. So I was at the time doing a Land Rover Defender 110, or actually Land Rover, technically a Santana 2500 DL. And I threw them on there and I got to tell you, like, I'm not going back. Don't get me wrong. The BFG is a great tire, but those Toyo open countries are awesome. So, hey, you might call me crazy. You're probably like, this guy's nuts, what he's talking about. But what are your thoughts when it comes to tires?
Yeah, you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so I was actually a huge BFG fan for like a long time. And I still like their tires and still have them on 2 vehicles. And I've had other tires now that I feel perform better than that. But it's like the BFG was always just like such a classic, iconic tire.
Yeah, right.
And I love the way they look. Like no one else does. I like a raced weight leather tire, and no one else does a raced weight leather tire that looks that good. So
with that sidewall,
it just always looks so good, especially on something older. But that being said, I have Falcons on 2 different vehicles. So Falcon Wild Peak AT, actually on my wife's Jeep, and MT's on mine. And I was really happy with the wet weather performance, on-road performance, and they balance really well. They seem to run really true. So I've been a pretty big fan of those lately.
I think one of our biggest metrics on how we judge a tire here is how it balances.
Yeah.
So like if we get tires consistently that don't balance well or take a lot of weight or have high road force, it's generally a tire that we're not going to sell because it means in the future that they're coming back. And so I think probably our best-selling tires are either Toyo, Nitto, or Falcon. It's probably the top 3. And I think specifically Toyo and Nitto, they're kind of sister companies owned by the same parent company, and they really do a great job marketing to enthusiasts. So like, your average Joe doesn't really care. They go to their local Walmart and get whatever black and round tires on there. Well, that's not your Nitto buyer. The Nitto and Toyo really market to people that are listening to this podcast, and I think Nitto and Toyo both have 5 different tires that appeal to dirt enthusiasts, 4-wheel drive enthusiasts. And that's what I really like about them.
Yeah.
So, and they balance extremely well.
Okay, so I never thought about that variable, and this is great that have you guys with this experience and the stuff that tests that last the test of time and longevity is just how well they balance. Man, I never really thought about that. Yeah,
that's huge.
And are you guys running road force balancers in? Yep. Wow, that's not a cheap piece of equipment, man. Especially when you can get just a cheap, balancer to throw a road force balancer. That's a no joke piece of equipment, and that means
it's really been transformative though. Getting a piece of equipment like that because we can find bad tires before they even leave. So you can actually see the road force. There's a limit of like 40 pounds of road force, and if there's a tire that's over 40 pounds of road force, you're gonna feel it. And so we just reject it right there. It's like, hey, I don't care if this tire is new, it's bad. And we get another one and replace it. So, reducing comebacks and that kind of stuff is super important for us. So that's why it's really important to make sure we get tires that balance well and have low road force.
Gotcha.
Yep.
So out of the Falcons, which one is your go-to Falcon?
Well, there's a mud terrain and all terrain.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So depends on the terrain.
Gotcha. And I guess the same holds true for both the Toyos and the Nittos. Yeah, the Nittos too. Like I never really thought about the Nittos. I on my TRD Pro, I daily drive a TRD Pro, like I'd mentioned. That comes with the Nitto Ridge grapplers, I believe.
They make a Recon grappler, a Ridge grappler. They make, of course, the Mud grappler. I mean, the Trail grappler. They've got a whole line of really good stuff. And Toyo mirrors it. They almost to the T make the same type for the same space. So both brands are awesome.
I've been nothing but impressed with the Nittos that are on my Toyota that came from the factory. And I think it's the Ridge grappler. I forget which ones come from the factory, but they've been in the ice, the snow. They've been in the rain. They've been phenomenal. But, on my projects and my collection of the Toyos, man, I'm glad that you guys, that there are other people out there. I thought I was like crazy, like the Lone Ranger that was like, I love these Toyos. So I'm glad
if we had this conversation 10 years ago, 15 years ago, yeah, we would have stopped it at BFG All-Terrains, KO2s, Yep, that's what we put on everything. Because that's what we did.
It's true. And still to this day, when I go to buy tires, the first thing I look at are like the KO2s. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to buy them again. I'm like, and I end up pulling the trigger on the Toyos every time.
But for like a trend, I think the closest one is probably that Falcon Wild Peak 18.3. Yeah. To the KO2 tread pattern, that hybrid aggressive all-terrain space is super popular. So we see a lot of companies. Falcon just came out with one, like a RT Trail, I think they call it. Toyo just came out with one called RT. They call it RT Trail as well. And it's a revised version of their RT. Nitto has one also. So that hybrid space is huge.
That's cool. That's awesome.
Yep.
So you heard it here. The Falcons, the Toyos, and the Nittos. But the BFG is always going to be the grandfather, right? We're always going to look to him. We're always going to look to him first, man.
Right. You want something really vintage? That's it.
I love them though, man. They're great. But I have been buying more Toyos than anything. So let's talk about the one modification topic, which we could talk about for a very long time. By far, which is suspension and lifts, man. I will tell you, this is an area where if you look at almost every vehicle I've ever had in my collection, it's all been lifted, whether I bought it that way or I had it done. I've used several different manufacturers, from ProComp to Rough Country to Old Man Emu. I mean, the Old Man Emu kits are just second to none, and you got to pay for it, but they're absolutely phenomenal. And also Rubicon Express. And out of those four, there's one I'll never use again. There's one that has a special application, one that just isn't as prominent in the market, and one that I will always use and continue to use. And on my last four projects that I've lifted where I've done full suspension, I've used their full kits, and that's Rough Country. And I take a lot of flack for that. I will say to everybody, like, I am the biggest Rough Country full suspension lift kit advocate there is, because I've had nothing but amazing experiences. I did a Pro Comp that lasted for 15 years and it did great. I didn't use it that hard. The shocks got a little soft and the springs got a little saggy, and I ended up replacing it with a newer full Rough Country kit with the N3s and was nothing but impressed. Have used that Rough Country kit on multiple Jeeps, on the Land Rover Santana. It has parabolic springs. I did the Old Man Emu full kit, and again, great kit. On my CJ8 Scrambler, that was an immaculate 100-point concourse build. And I said, you know what? I can't put a Rough Country kit on this, like that would be weird. Like, have this big high dollar. I'm doing engine swaps, full powertrain swaps. Like, how could I put I don't want somebody to look under there and see those silver N3s and be like, why? So I ended up doing a Rubicon Express kit, paying up for that Rubicon Express kit. And it was not the best experience I've ever had. It was mediocre at best. And I wish I had gone back to that rough country kit. So that's my 2 cents. You guys are lifting almost everything that comes into the shop, and you guys
every day we have multiple technicians that are lifting Tacomas, Gladiators, JLs, JKs. That's kind of our bread and butter stuff. And
what's your go-to for a classic, for a Tacoma, for a JL, JK, or a JT? Like, what are your go-tos there that you've really seen? Because your customers are out beating on these things. You guys are out beating on these things. What have come back and stand the test of time? And where you're with a customer on a Sunday and you're like, oh, I'm going to see this thing on Monday, and you never hear from them ever again. Or like you put in something, or you see somebody out on the trail and you're like, oh man, that thing's not going to, oh, there we go. It just busted. It popped. I saw it on Monday. What's your go-to? What do you guys like to put in?
So I would like to echo what you said earlier about rough country. We've got probably a 20-year relationship with rough country. And for most people, rough country works out to be an exceptional option. I think often they get an undeserved bad rap because they hold that value proposition in the marketplace. And so naturally people are thinking, oh, if this is a value priced product, it must be inferior. But I would like to say that this can't be further from the truth. Right. Are there certain situations where we've had problems with rough country stuff? Yeah. Are there situations that we've had problems with everybody else's stuff too? 100%. I don't care I don't care what manufacturer it is, whether it's Rubicon Express. Rubicon Express kind of had a major issue 20 years ago. Every bushing they put in a control arm failed. And so every single suspension brand there has issues. And I think the bad rap that rough country gets is often undeserved.
And I am in the same boat. It's completely unjustified. You can get a full kit for $750. It's almost like if they charge $2,500 for that, right? They wouldn't have that wrap, right?
I know. Yeah.
If anyone from Rough Country is listening, please don't charge $2,500 for your kits. I love them. But I am the biggest Rough Country and every time I stray away from it, and don't get me wrong, if I was to do a Toyota like an FJ or a Land Rover, I would be old man.
They have their niche. They have their place.
They have their niche. You pay for them, but you're getting what you pay for. Phenomenal. So I'm glad to hear that you guys actually echo my thoughts and my experiences. Obviously, you have greater experience in this area than I will ever have, but it's great to hear that you guys echo the rough country. Is there any other standout full suspension kits that you're like, wow, I enjoy putting them on and they stand the test of time?
Go for it. I think it depends.
Yeah, it depends on what kind of vehicle it's on. But I know on a full-size truck, say you're doing a full-size Chevy truck lift, we've done a lot of the BDS kits on them. And I think they put a lot more thought into that market than the Jeep market.
Yeah.
So depending on what kind of vehicle you're doing.
For leaf sprung stuff.
Yeah. If you're doing an old leaf spring truck, a BDS kit works pretty good on.
Yeah. And they're owned by Fox, so you can option it with Fox shocks, which is kind of a cool little upgrade. I think, you really got to understand, I think in our position, we really understand suspension dynamics and to a degree, engineering behind it. And so there are definitely certain kits that we'll recommend for certain brands. Do we install a lot of rough country on JLs and JKs? No, we don't. We don't install. Do we install a lot of rough country on IFS, diff drop, leveling kit stuff? Yeah, we do install a lot of rough country on that. So I think our go-to probably for JLs, JK, and JT, so this is a Gladiator and the Wranglers, is probably either a EV for like factory OE engineered quality, good driver stuff, or metal cloak for like the hardcore maximum articulation possible. There's kind of two camps there. Do we install rough country sometimes? Yeah, sure. Yeah. You know, if there's a budget point that we've got to hit, or if it's a simple 2-inch spacer kit, yeah, sure. Not a big deal. But I think for the JL, JK, that's probably our go-to, either AEV or metal cloak.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm asking this question selfishly. What about the CJs? What are you putting in the CJs and the FSJs, the Jeeps out there?
So I have the full-size stuff. I have that BJ's 6-inch on my Waggy.
The BJ's off-road one?
Yeah.
It's funny. I've looked at that before.
Yep. And so I got 35s on it. It's like a nice kit. It's pretty simple. It's just leaf springs, you know, like nothing out of the ordinary there. So I seem to like that kit. For me, I think that for a lot of the vintage stuff, Skyjacker seems to have done a pretty good job with their leaf springs and rates and like replacement kits. I can't say the same about their newer stuff, but their classic stuff, man,
they've been doing it
forever.
Since that stuff was new. So.
Right. So that's probably good go to there.
What about Forerunners, Gen 5 Forerunners? Again, I'm asking this selfishly.
Yeah. What do you think? I mean, there's a lot of different brands out there.
Yeah, I feel like we've been doing a mix of stuff between the Toy Tech, Robinson, Old Man Emo.
Yeah. Those are probably top
kit.
Bilstein, the 8100s and 6100s. Yeah. That's probably our top 4, I would say. Toy Tech, Dobinson, whatever else, Bilstein, yeah, those are probably our top 4. Yeah.
Gotcha. So if a mid 80s square body comes in,
Travis, Sauce Spartan, Travis's heart of these.
All right, man. Mid 80s square body comes in, right? And they want a 4-inch lift. What are you putting on it?
On that, if it was a guy that wanted to wheel it and use it, I would tell them to do some off-road design stuff. They're a small company that like specializes in that, like solid axle GM stuff. If it's a guy that just wants a nice looking driver, I would probably be I would even consider doing a rough country kit on one of those, or like the BDS or Skyjacker, just
yeah.
So a mid 70s FJ40 comes in. All right. You want something, in the 2 to 3 inch suspension lift range. What are you doing?
Probably the only options on an Amy, really. Yeah.
I was going to say that. Is there really too many other options? I think, and that holds true, I think, with the Land Rovers, like the Defenders and the 110s and the 90s. There aren't really a lot of options other than the Old Man Emu. So I guess that you kind of just check both those boxes. If it comes in, it's classic Toyota, classic Land Rover. I think. Really, are there any other options out there? I don't know if
Dobinson would make anything. They might. I don't know. I don't know if anybody else would.
And for our listeners out there, I have to ask, because this is a popular one, OBS Fords, right? So OBS with the 7.3 comes in, the Super Duty comes in. They sit pretty high from the factory in the first place, but you want to add a couple extra inches. What are you using?
I think it all comes back to that, like, lease sprung brands, like either Skyjacker, Rough Country, BDS, are probably the go-to. I think if there's a guy out there that wants like a super, super, super premium leaf spring, it's hard not to mention Deaver in that mix, because they make like really high-end leaf springs. They use a lot of plies, and so you get a really compliant, progressive spring. I mean, leaf springs are progressive by nature, and so the more plies that you have in a leaf spring, I think generally the better ride quality you're going to get out of that leaf spring. So just to throw that kind of into the mix there, a lot of times you'll see Deavers and they'll have 8 or 9 plies in them, but they're thin plies, and so you get that really compliant, comfortable spring. The tough part with a company like that is physically getting the product, because these are made to order springs. And so getting a leaf spring like that, you might wait 3 months for them.
Okay,
Or
gotcha.
you could order like an off-the-shelf rough country Skyjacker and have it in probably 3 days.
Yeah.
Right.
True. Actually, you bring up a good point because I've done this before. I've had custom leaf springs made. You know, I have a great spring shop and suspension shop right by me. That's really well known, and that's R&H. I'll always give them a plug. They're great. But they will make you a custom leaf spring, and I've actually had them make me a custom leaf spring before, and it's second to none. I mean, you don't get anything better. You don't get anything better than that. I mean, to the point where they'll make it. They'll go out and drive it and say, I don't like that. They'll pull a leaf out. They'll add a leaf, like you were saying before. Do you guys do that type of work, or do you have anybody that does that type of work?
I wish we could. I don't know if we have any go-to manufacturers, or we don't have any like. I mean, of course, we'll take a leaf spring apart, put leaves in, and play around with leaf springs, sure. But I don't know that we have anybody that's our go-to. I know there is a Dayton Parts manufacturing hub in Harrisburg, but I don't think they have any like walk-in. They're strictly a manufacturer for Dayton. So although they do make it, and we picked stuff up there before, I don't know that they will just take a walk-in guy and you know, if you're asking to re-arch some leaf springs or something like that, I don't know. So typically we'll ship them in from like Deaver. Deaver will do mini packs for Tacomas and stuff like that. Or we just go with whatever the manufacturer has made. And as long as you're not like way outside the box, generally a cookie cutter kit works pretty well for most.
Gotcha. So it's kind of like lighting. It depends on the specific vehicle and the application and what you're going to do with it is what makes the most sense. And I love that objectivity that you guys bring to it. And there's no, but I'm also very happy that you didn't crucify me because I love, I'm a big rough country advocate because I got to tell you, I've had that conversation a couple times with people and they just started like looking at me like I have 10 heads. Like, he just say that? And you're like, yeah man, I have great experience. I mean, bang for your buck, absolutely phenomenal experience. And as crazy as it sounds, outside of Old Man Emu, the more expensive, kits I've used have actually been less and less happy with and extremely underwhelmed, to say the least.
It seems like the newer stuff, what the big dollar money part of this is shocks. Mm-hmm. Whereas like before it was like, well, what shock do you want? A hydro or a nitro? Like that was your two options back in the day. Well, now today it's like, well, do you want an aluminum body, a steel body? Do you want a monotube? Do you want an external reservoir? Do you want triple bypass? Do you want adjustable dampening? Do you want dual speed adjustable? Right. Do you want, compression and rebound adjustable? Like there's a lot of options when it comes to shocks anymore, especially the newer stuff, JK, JL, Forerunner, Tacoma, even Raptors. I mean, the shock thing is probably the biggest expense that you can have. And I think that's where a lot of times we were kind of talking about earlier, the stuff that you want to see versus how you're going to actually use the vehicle. Guys are hanging shocks on their like leaf sprung F-150, a 78 or something like that with reservoirs and bypasses, thinking that it's going to make it ride more comfortably, which could be further from the truth, So I think people still need to recognize with shocks, a good, nice monotube shock is probably all you need, unless you're running the Baja 1000 or you're doing lots of washboard roads, or you're like where you're really rapidly using that shock where it's going to fade and not control the vehicle anymore. Well, then that's when we should talk about having a shock that's got additional capacity and better cooling and that kind of stuff. So not to say that having shocks that you can adjust aren't convenient. Sure, sometimes they are, but for most people, especially collectors or somebody that's not going to be running their vehicle at 80 miles an hour down a washboard dirt road, a standard good monotube shock, like even a Fox Adventure Series, I think it's probably one of my favorite. I would say, I don't want to say entry level shock because it's far from that, but like non-reservoired shock because it's aluminum bodied, it's got machined eyelets. It's just kind of something cool.
It works. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to stick to my N3s, right?
Yeah. No, they're great. They are great. Well, they just came out with the V2, the Rough Country V2, which is an all aluminum body, machined eyelets, very similar to that Fox shock.
That's cool. And I'm glad you brought that up because I never really thought about how that technology has just blossomed in the past several years. But you see it all the time, especially with the auxiliary reservoir. And I think Fox is like the king of the auxiliary reservoir shock. But from what I'm hearing from you guys, it's like just a simple monotube just works for almost everyone.
For most people. But everybody's used to seeing like all these stock vehicles like the Raptors, which are coming with 3-inch diameter remote reservoir. I mean, there's a lot of the Gladiator Mojaves are coming with big reservoirs. I mean, there's a lot of OEM vehicles that are coming out with some super high-end shocks on them. The Colorado, so there's a pile of that stuff out there. And it often then translates to the aftermarket, what people are wanting to see on their dailies.
That's actually, you bring up a great point, which we should unpack real quick, is how the manufacturers are incorporating, a lot of their special editions with what used to be just purely aftermarket suppliers. Right. Now they're incorporating them in. You have, like you said, what comes on the Raptors now?
Yeah, I mean, a 3-inch diameter. I mean, the Raptor is spread out of like a Baja 1000 race truck. It's got long travel control arms, huge 3-inch diameter coilovers. The newer ones are, what do they call it? I want to say E-click, but it's live valve, where like the shock can change valving depending on speed and all sorts of variables. I mean, like, it's really incredible what the OEMs are coming out with, and everybody's trying to compete with everybody else on that kind of stuff. So Jeep did it with their Mojave, and then, I would say probably a better comparison would be the TRX, right? So Ford came out with the Raptor, and then the Raptor R, and Stellantis and Chrysler's like, oh yeah, watch this, and they come out with the TRX, and then so everybody's kind of trying to one up, but a lot of these companies are coming with some pretty cool equipment on them. The power wagons are coming with winches and lockers and low range. And of course, the Rubicon now is 20 years old, which is incredible and hard to believe. But they just released a 20th anniversary edition Rubicon, which comes with 37s and a 392 from the turnkey, steel bumpers. I mean, just all sorts. It's like, wow, this is the dream rig, and you don't even have to come to a shop like us to get it built. You can order it, and it's put on the assembly line. They come with the Chevy came out with the, I guess it would be GMC, the AT4. And now they're coming out with, I forget what it's called, the designation, but it's got skids and all AEV'd out with a bunch of neat stuff. So this genre of off-road is definitely growing, I think, faster than any other aftermarket enthusiast group.
Yeah, I couldn't agree anymore, man. It's
and I love to see it.
Yeah, me too, man. I love because it brings more presence and prominence for all of us. So
yeah.
That's cool, man. It's definitely cool. Let's as we kind of get into the end here, let's wrap up with some of the projects you have in the shop that are classic 4x4s, right? What have you had in recently? What is probably the most notable classic four-wheel drive product or project you guys have ever had in the shop that you can think of?
Well, I mean, we'd probably be remiss if we didn't talk about the CJ that we built on the TJ chassis. Yep. That was pretty cool. We built, we had a near and dear customer that had a family heirloom CJ7, but he wanted it to drive like a TJ. And so we built that. We took a CJ body and a modified TJ chassis and put it all together. So it had coil sprung suspension. It had fuel injected 4-liter. It was basically a TJ with a CJ body on it. That was pretty unique. Yeah. We built it from scratch. We've had a lot of unique stuff. Just recently, like 2 weeks ago, we had John's CJ6 in, which is cool.
That's some unicorn stuff right there.
Yeah.
That is, so talk about a seat. I mean, CJ6s are rare in the first place. You probably have seen one. I've in metal only seen one in my entire life as an enthusiast, and it was roached. Right, I've never actually seen like a running and driving one in person. So let's talk about that.
Definitely like a working man's rig.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that one had we put a fuel injected 4-liter in it probably 10 years ago, but it's owned by a really near dear customer who's got a whole cool eclectic collection of old Jeeps. So we just did some maintenance stuff on that. The fuel tank was leaking. It's definitely a working man's rig, and he uses it on the property on his farm, and like that's what we like to see. But we got a bunch of cool stuff in. I would say we don't see a whole lot of Rover stuff.
No.
But we see a fair amount of everything else.
Yeah.
Fair amount of everything else.
Any FJ projects off the top of your head you can think of? Any customers that bring in FJs?
A handful of FJ40s in. There was a FJ40 maybe 2 years ago.
Yeah.
They put like a new frame under and a Chevy small block in it. We kind of fixed that one up.
Yeah. We had that really nice cream puff one that was in maybe 6 months ago.
Yep.
And we just did maintenance stuff. I think it had a coolant leak that we chased down, replaced the radiator, and spots and stuff on. You know, that's the biggest thing with all this older stuff is there's always something that needs tinkering. So, you know, you got to have that mindset when you're buying something that's 30, 40 years old, is that there's always going to be some sort of tinkering that needs to happen on it. And for most people, we're their go-to.
That's great to hear. You're preaching to the choir, man. It's like every day. I mean, I don't have anything in my garage. I think the oldest right now I have in my garage, it was 87. Now it's 85, right? You know, it's the absolute, or I should say the newest is 85, man. I mean, it's funny you talk about chasing down a coolant leak. I have a J10, I have an 82 J10 with and I'll tell you why I bought this, right? Because it didn't have a 360 in it. That's why. That's why. It's got the 258 with the T177 into the MP 205 or 208. I forget which one. And that's why I bought it. I've had some FSJs with 360s in them, and they're traditionally get married to the automatic, the 3-speed automatic, and the 727 into the Quadra-Track, and those chains explode in the Quadra-Track. The 727 is always slappy. The 360 is just like
loud and slow.
It's loud, it's slow, and it's horribly unreliable, right?
Yeah,
so after my last one, I said I'm not going to buy no more 360s. I'm done. It's either going to be a 401 or a 258. And I have 258s in almost everything, all my CJs. Yeah. And I have to tell you, I found this J10 and it had the 258. And I love the T176 and, you know, the longer output shaft for the on the FSGs, you have the 177s. But man, I got to tell you, my guy has been, my trusted mechanic has been chasing down a coolant leak recently. And then I finally was like, you know what? Just do it all. Radiator, water pump, everything. Like, you know, when you get to that point where you just like, you throw the white flag up and you're like, you know, and it wasn't a bad coolant leak. It was just a small little tiny drip, right? Which are the worst ones. Because if it's spewing, you're at least like, you care a little bit more.
Yeah.
I finally was just like, man, rip it all out.
Right. All of it.
Because you're eventually going to have to do the water pump anyway, which you have to take the radiator out for anyway. I was like, just start from top. So I haven't seen that in like 2 months, but hopefully I'll get it back soon.
Yeah. I was always cool on those 258s. You just yank them out, put a 4-liter in, or even fuel inject it pretty easily.
I love the 258s, man. It's just, again, from experience, every single knock on wood, I've never had a major problem with any of them, man.
Yeah.
I mean,
they're not power monsters, but they're generally pretty torquey and reliable.
Certainly not power monsters. As long as you have, you know, a T176 or 177 behind it, the SR4, the T4, the T5, it doesn't gear them right, you know, and they just are slow and clunky. But I don't know, man. I absolutely love them. But we'll leave it at that. You know, I really appreciate your time today, guys. I mean, an immense amount of valuable information for myself, for our listeners, from a crew, a team at Mount Zion Offroad, that not only are you guys out there testing this stuff, your customers are testing it but you're installing it on a day-to-day basis and you see what comes back. And you threw some great names out there, and hopefully that created some clarity for all of our listeners on when they do their next project, they decide to do their next lift, throw in their next replacement headlight, get another set of tires and say, maybe I won't look at the BFGs. Maybe I'll go with the Toyotas or the Dittos. Right. But in the end, it's going to all come back to that Ward winch, right?
Yeah, it's hard to beat it. It's hard to beat it for sure.
Hey guys, man, I really appreciate your time, your participation. Really greatly appreciate it. And I look forward to the next time I'm out in your area, us crossing paths.
Yeah, I'd love that. That'd be great.
That'd be a lot of fun. All right, guys, be well.
Yeah, take care.
I really appreciate Mike and Travis from Mount Zion Offroad's take on lifts, lights, tires, and winches. I took away a couple things from that conversation. The first is cost does not always equal quality. Just because something's expensive doesn't mean it's the best. My other big takeaway is unless you're running Moab or the Rubicon regularly, most mods are just overkill. But stay tuned for our next episode with Nate Bond from Proper EV, where we discuss the classic truck EV conversions, the process, components, timeframes, and the cost of converting classic vehicles to electric vehicles.